Welcome to the online lecture for Chapter 8, Organizational Culture. Culture is another one of those words like charisma that we all think we know what it means, but it can be challenging to define. So let's look at some metaphors or ways of thinking about organizations that are used in organizational communication and will help us to understand what organizational culture is. One of these metaphors is the container metaphor. And this idea looks at an organization like a container that things take place inside of. You can probably see how that's problematic because it doesn't acknowledge influences that are coming in from the outside. Another metaphor says that an organization is like an organism that might have ears and eyes and heart and lungs. And if you injure one part of the organism, other parts have to make up for it. Or the organization could be in pain. This metaphor seems a little bit more useful than the container one. Our book's authors suggest that you think of an organization like a tribe, where people are interacting with one another and everybody is necessary. And with a tribe, meaning making occurs within the interaction, within the organization, during the communication process. So these metaphors all give us some ways to envision what happens within organizations and among the people who make up an organization. Organizational communication is really interpersonal communication within an organizational context. If you look at page 237 of the textbook, you'll find a list of different elements that help to make up organizational culture. Those things are all elements that drive culture. So we can think about things like language choices, the ways we dress, the rites and rituals the organization has, the stories people tell one another. And if a leader understands the elements that are driving the culture of a particular organization, then that leader can work to manage those in different ways. Let's look at some of them. One important element of organizational culture is language and the word choices that people use to talk about what happens in the organization and their roles within the organization. One thing you can consider when looking at language is whether people use I language or we language when they talk about their workplace, because that will tell you something about how they see the culture of that workplace. An example of this, I did a study where I interviewed 25 students who had done internships about what their intern experience was like. And one of the things I was looking for was whether they used I language or we language in talking about that internship experience. And I found that students who did not feel very engaged or involved with the organization would say things like, I did this, I did that, my duties were such and such. But students who really enjoyed the experience and felt a connection with others at the organization would often use we language and say things like, at our company, we did this and we did that, and my coworkers and I had these duties. So it's interesting to look at those language choices and what they tell you as a leader about how people are viewing your organization. Another important element of organizational culture is stories and myths. You'll recall that way back in the very first chapter, we started talking about storytelling in organizations and the role of storytelling in shaping organizational folklore. So consider when you joined an organization, what stories were told to you about things that happened in the past or about how certain people behave. And what stories do you pass on to other people as a leader? Consider what stories you hear followers telling one another. That's a big clue in what they think about the organization. Rites and rituals are another prominent part of organizational culture, and these are repeated patterns of behavior that occur among the people within the organization. For example, ceremonies when people get promoted or a retirement party or some kind of award you might get for meeting your sales goals. Or maybe if you've been with the organization for 5 years, you get a special pin to wear on your lapel, things like that. In the organization of Western Michigan University, when somebody graduates and completes their degree requirements, we have a ritual they go through where they put on a cap and gown and walk across the stage and receive a diploma. Organizations also have rituals like that. So think about what these say about the organization. Also, what does an absence of rituals say? Maybe you go to work in an organization that doesn't seem to have any of these practices. What would that tell you? At Zappos Shoe Company, they have a day they call Bald and Blue Day, where they have a ritual of shaving their heads and painting their heads blue. And it was something they did together, a ritual that was meant to bond everybody together and make everybody have part of a shared experience. So think about what a ritual like that symbolizes about a company and its leadership. Here are some other elements of organizational culture that we can examine to see how the leader is working to shape the culture. The first is attention. Where does the leader put his or her attention in the organization? Do they focus mostly on things that go well? Do they focus mostly on problems? Do they focus on some people at the expense of others? What gets their attention? How does the leader react to critical incidents? When there's a crisis, and we'll talk a little more about crisis management in a future module, but when there's a crisis, are they cool-headed and give good direction, or do they check out and just let the chips fall where they may and let their followers figure things out for themselves? Resource allocation. Where does the money and the resources go, and what does that tell you about what the leader considers most important? Role modeling. Is the leader a boss or a coach? Rewards. What gets rewarded and what gets punished? In other words, how is that leader employing reward power and coercive power within the organization? Selection. Who gets hired and who gets promoted? One of those interns I talked about said that in her organization, the woman who led the interns was a younger woman who was very pretty and came from a privileged background, and she tended to hire young women like herself. So the students said that she felt she was part of a group of women that she didn't fit in with, and that the leader was hiring people like herself because that's who she wanted to be around. So look at the makeup of the staff, what are their backgrounds, and look at how much diversity is within the organization. Now we turn to the Pygmalion effect. And the Pygmalion effect has to do with the influence that leaders have on the way followers think of themselves. How capable does a follower think of themselves? And what is the leader's role in influencing that idea of capability? The Pygmalion effect tells us that followers tend to live up to a leader's expectations. And you may have experienced this yourself if you ever had a boss or a coach, and athletic coaches can be particularly good at this, that made you feel like you can do it. They say things like, I know you guys are great, you're smart, I have faith in you. You tend to want to live up to that. So leaders should have high but realistic expectations, and that will get the most out of followers. You want to challenge people, but not challenge them past their ability, but challenge them enough so that they want to succeed and feel that they can succeed. If you've ever had a leader who motivated you in that way, you were experiencing the Pygmalion effect. So how can a leader use the Pygmalion effect to its best advantage? Well, one way is to put new employees with effective managers, to put them with the best people you have for their training, because that way they will aspire to be as good as those people. A lot of times in an organization, a new person is given to the next most recent new hire for training, and that might not be the best way to go. Maybe you want to put that person with some of your best people, your senior people, for their training. I think we've all experienced in a fast food place where the person on register is brand new. Way back when in another career, I was an assistant manager at a Taco Bell, and our way of operating was to put the new person on register right away because we thought that was a way to make the new person productive right away. That was the philosophy there. But if you've ever ordered from someone like that, you've seen that the person doesn't know the prices, they don't know the menu. If you want something added to your order, they have to call somebody else over because they don't know how to ring it up. And that experience led me to think that maybe that's not the most effective way to use a brand new person. Maybe we should take the time to train that person on all the backroom stuff and put them with the good employees so that by the time they're out front and they're interacting with the public and they're the face of your organization, they have the knowledge that they need to be successful and to represent the organization in its best light. You can also use the Pygmalion effect to your advantage by eliminating language that suggests that only a few people can be high achievers, but rather say everybody can meet their sales goal. Everybody in the class can earn an A. That kind of speech tends to encourage people more. Nothing pleases me more than having lots of A's in the class. I don't believe in telling followers that only one person can have the prize. You may have a different idea about whether that's motivational, but in many cases, the idea that I can succeed whether or not I am better than everybody else can be a really effective motivator. Those are some of the highlights of Chapter 8. As always, please read the chapter carefully and in its entirety, and contact me if you have any questions. I'll see you over in the next module.